Hello and welcome to another edition of the Ducks Confidential Podcast. I'm James Crepea, as always, joined by Ryan Clarke, and we'll get into a few things here as the Ducks are basically in the midst of fall camp, along with everybody else around the country. But as we enter the third calendar week, the second full week in and of itself of practice, the second full week of full padded practice for that matter, or at least where some of the practices are full pads. So a little bit more to discern after the first scrimmage. We'll get into that a little bit. But we'll start with what, look, it draws attention. They don't, you don't get awards for these things. Nobody really remembers it in retrospect, but they are nevertheless the preseason polls, and they are the polls that carry some weight and matter. Obviously, again, they don't exactly carry all the weight in the world heading into the season, but nevertheless, they are the preseason polls. They are the early litmus test of where things are and where people believe these teams are entering the 2024 season. So with that, Oregon comes in at number 3 in both the preseason coaches poll and the preseason AP poll. So with Dan Lanning being one of the voters in the preseason coaches poll, and in the AP poll, the variance for the Ducks in terms of the vote dispersal was one voter had them number 1. That was Brett McMurphy, formerly of ESPN. And a couple of voters had them at 2. The majority and plurality had them at 3. The next largest group had them at 4. And then 3 voters had them at 5, and 1 as low as 6. So that's kind of your scatter plot, if you will, of the AP voters for the Ducks heading into the season. Very much, like I say, in line with, we don't know exactly the breakdown of the preseason coaches other than that they were 3rd and didn't receive a first place vote among the coaches. Not exactly a surprise, but bottom line, a season that we already knew had high expectations and a lot of hype and a lot of billing of individual players and accolades and transfers and NIL and all the things that we've talked about and mentioned before. Very much living up to that in terms of perception from the preseason coaches poll and AP poll, where, like I say, they come in as high as they've been in either going back to 2014 or 2013, depending on which poll we're talking about. So therefore, for the program that is moving into the Big Ten, that as we all know has had quite a quarter century or so of success, still has not broken through to that highest of levels in terms of winning a championship, but right there with the likes of Georgia, who's number 1 in both polls, Ohio State, which is number 2 in both polls. Obviously, it's setting up for, as we all knew, a epic matchup on October 12th. That will be the focus, regardless of what happens for both Oregon and Ohio State between now and then. If you look at the schedules for both teams, it would be hard to assume a loss for either one of them heading into that game. So that could and should be one of the biggest games of the entire season. If we're going to go based on the polls, if not based on recruiting talent, if not based on any number of other factors, that's kind of the lay of the land as we head into the season and where things stand by way of that. And we'll get, obviously you can look at the polls to see who else is ranked and what number and all those kinds of things. But your view, your perspective, your takeaways from some of these early polls and numbers there, Ryan.
Yeah, I think that it's proof positive that this Oregon team is in the view of experts, in the view of coaches, absolutely among the national championship contenders this year. You think about the last 20 years of the national champions. Pretty much all of them have come out of the preseason top 7. That's of course a statement that applies more specifically to the fact that college football is top heavy. These top programs have sort of always been in this spot. But by that same token, it's a good sign for Oregon to give itself a bite out of the apple this year. It's obviously not terribly informative in a lot of ways either, but interesting in terms of the storylines it does create, like that Ohio State game. Of course, that I think that Ohio State and Oregon fans could be forgiven for overlooking the first few weeks of their season just because they are thinking constantly about that matchup in Eugene on October 12th. And it's going to be an exciting one for sure in terms of the talent on the field. And in terms of the rankings, look, Georgia does not have a peachy schedule to start the season. There is that is a very talented Georgia team that may well be undefeated at that point as well. But you're talking about the potential for that being a 1 versus 2 matchup if Georgia slips up against any number of these, high level teams that they play in those first 5 weeks. So whether it's 2-3 or 1-2, that's obviously the thing you have circled. Obviously, Michigan comes in at number 9. Some folks think maybe just by being the reigning national champions alone with all they lost, some folks have posited they might be a bit overrated in that spot, but they got to play the games. And then USC being one of the other Big Ten schools in the top 25, along with Iowa 25 and 23 respectively. Boise State too, like the Idaho game, obviously folks could also be forgiven for completely overlooking that because that's going to more than likely be a significant blowout in favor of the Ducks.
Yeah, look,
but that Boise State game is interesting. Polls,
Idaho is a preseason number 7. I'll have you know in the FCS polls. So
that's right.
Overlook at your own peril. All right, we have to. Come on now. This is a top 10 matchup. Ryan,
that's true.
Why are we overlooking the mighty Vandals, formerly of the FBS? I mean, come on now.
I shouldn't. That's true. And the top 10 across the 2 different top 25s, that's big. But that Boise State game, has a little bit of intrigue to it, just because you look at how they project out the college football playoff based on that top 25 rankings. And right now, that Boise State game is a preview of what would be a first round playoff game at Autzen Stadium again this time in the winter. So something interesting there out of the polls, but beyond that, really, I mean, it's the preseason hype. It's not necessarily instructive in terms of the college football playoff and those rankings, which are completely dependent upon conference championships and everything else. But man, Oregon, they're at number 3 among all those elite programs. That's got to have fans excited for sure.
I think if there's anything to be taken away at all from a really broad and wide-angle lens look at the preseason polls is, look, we already knew with realignment that this was a power 2 and the next 2 and then everybody else. Like it was already understood. It was clear as crystal. You didn't need to be a genius to figure out that the SEC and the Big Ten are going to run everything, and the Big 12 and the ACC will be willing, more than willing, that they're going to be welcome to the party under the terms that the other 2 set, and everybody else is just going to have to deal. Well, the top 9 in the AP poll are either SEC or Big Ten teams or Notre Dame. So you don't have to be a genius to realize these things. And if you go even further down, quite frankly, you only have a couple of Big 12 teams in there in general, but especially among the top 15. But you can even expand it all the way to the 25. The Big 12 has the next cluster for sure, and the ACC has a few, no doubt. But ultimately, this is a 2-conference system, largely. Yes, the other team, the other conferences will get their champions into the playoff, and they'll have yes. But in terms of where the power lies here, which is hardly an epiphany, that's something to take. Is go take a look at where are all these schools playing at, and what's that competition going to look like? And that's, again, not to prognosticate about what the polls then become 3 months from now, but more so in what the competition is going to look like. Why did realignment happen beyond money? Well, yeah, it's to create the bigger matchups where all these teams are going to be beating up on each other on a week-to-week, which is also to say that I'm not saying it's going to happen this year, but in the not-too-distant future, you are absolutely going to have a Big Ten or SEC 3-loss, maybe even 4-loss team make the playoff. And not just make it. I think you're going to have a 3-loss SEC or Big Ten team make the playoff and win multiple games, if not a national championship. Yeah, I'm not saying it's going to happen in 2024, but give it time.
Yeah,
Give it time.
People thought that the expanded playoff would. Some people at least thought that the expanded playoff would perhaps cool some of the debate regarding selection for those playoff spots. But in fact, the super conference realignment nature of the situation lends itself to more debate and more situations like the one that you're talking about, where, like, let's say a 3-loss Michigan team, gets into the Big Ten championship and beats an Oregon or beats an Ohio State. Then you're talking about a team with an automatic bid, a first round bye, and 3 losses, getting into a spot like that, or in a more likely scenario, getting a spot in being one of the higher ranked teams among the at-large bids. So it's it's what these conferences create, right? It's a preservation of power. It's a preservation of their standing among their competition, because the Florida States of the world and the Clemsons of the world are going to gripe and moan and complain in these scenarios, but it's judgment calls. It's subjective appearance, and so much of this is rooted in debate and everything. But it absolutely is merited given the power of these two conferences now.
Well, the auto bid part, that's just going to be the way it goes everywhere. So that's neither here nor there. I mean, ultimately, if that could have existed before. You had that with the divisions, where whether it's the Big Ten West division was weak. In the old Big 12, the Big 12 North was weak in certain years. Before Georgia's ascent, the SEC East was weaker than the West. So that ebbs and flows, and that's cyclical over time. And like I was saying, if you get into the title game, that there could be some crazy upset. That already existed even in the old BCS system. So that's neither here nor there. I'm not saying it can't happen this year, but not for nothing, the Big 12 is billing itself as the deepest conference in the country this year. And I understand that Utah's the preseason favorite, and that Kansas State and Kansas and Arizona are all getting love. The point is well, why are we assuming that it has to be the 3-loss team from the SEC or the Big Ten that causes controversy? How about if the Big 12 champion is a 3-loss team because it just cannibalizes itself much as the old Pac-12 did? Well, when the Pac-12 did it, if a team suffered 1 loss, they were basically knocked out of the 14 playoff by default, and a second loss was absolute. Well, now we're going to be in a world in an expanded playoff where why are we assuming that the Big 12 champ's getting in, but that could be a 3-loss team, and then we're going to be debating less about the worthiness of the multi-loss at-large SEC or Big Ten team from one of the most powerful leagues, and more about, hey, wait a minute, maybe this auto bid thing doesn't make so much sense. And that'll be the next conversation. So that's what I say, where we'll see, obviously, over the course of time, much as we saw in the 14 playoff, how it shifted the conversation and focus and the like. I think the expanded playoff will certainly keep things much more interesting, much deeper into the season, keep a lot of teams alive, much deeper into the season, and make for a lot of fun and excitement in the sport, probably more than ever before. But I think some of the discourse around worthiness and selectivity will not just be about at-larges. Like I say, I think some of it's going to be about whether auto bids should or shouldn't be a thing, whether the conference champions should automatically get the first-round bye. I think that's going to be something. But fortunately, ESPN has a look in with the playoff after a couple of years of the deal. So that's the other moving piece of this, combined with, to say nothing of, and I know what used to be Pac-12 fans and now Big Ten fans will be waxing poetic about, and they already were, but now Oregon's purposes, Big Ten fans, being the SEC continuing to only play 8 conference games, a conversation that Greg Sankey himself would very much like to have extinguished at this point over a year and a half ago, maybe 2.5 years ago. But they will get, I strongly suspect they're going to get to 9 in time, but they're delaying in part to see what the impact of the expanded playoff looks like, and what does that look like, and what would further cannibalization do to at-large team possibilities and the like. And I'm not sure that they can necessarily have a perfect answer for that after a year or two, but that's one of the other moving pieces of all this. So all to say, the preseason polls are out. Ducks are basically where they more or less where they were expected to be quite honest. I don't think if they were 4 or 5 behind a Texas or an Alabama that anybody really would have quibbled that much, to be totally honest with you. There's a there's a small gap in the AP poll between them and Texas. It's not enormous. If somebody had Texas ahead of Oregon, I really couldn't possibly object to that level. But bottom line, I mean, they're a preseason top 5. Whether you think they're 2, 3, 4, or 5 is a matter of perspective. But yeah, they're every bit as good. They're expected to be every bit as good on paper entering the season as those with the most green and yellow shaded glasses would believe. And those, again, across the country, you're getting a sampling of, yes, that people very much believe that this team is every bit worth the billing that they've been receiving so far. So that's where the perception parts of things come in at this point. Let's get to a little bit of reality now that we've had a chance to see, albeit a limited portion of practice for a couple of days, but we have seen some practices last week. Have seen a little bit by way of personnel, particularly on the offensive and defensive lines and certain pairings and the like, which is kind of part and parcel to what we get to see at practice. And like I say, there was the first scrimmage, which is always closed, and the second one will be as well. So kind of going on a little bit of combination of what Dan Lanning has to say after it, which is usually very little, combined with photos and videos that manage to come out, including from within the program itself, that you're able to discern a little bit by way of further verification of what Lanning has had to say or expounding on what he's had to say and the like. So
yeah, or the latest episode of Team Out West. I'm
sure that will be illuminating here whenever that comes along. I'm sure that will be a full breakdown of any number of things from camp as well. But bottom line being, from what we've seen and gleaned so far, and from kind of just a little bit of conjecture that I've heard a little bit, sounds like when it's ones-on-ones that there is a lot of legitimate just back and forth. That there is not, you would not say that, and it's not happening all the time for those who are not deep in the weeds of these things. When starters are going against starters pretty much anywhere, especially in a camp setting where they're not scheming each other up and where they know each other's, the defense knows the offense's cadence, the offense knows the defensive playbook pretty well here. And you're not really trying to, quote unquote, beat each other in that way. That from what I've been gathering and from what I've been gleaning and from some of the things I've been hearing, that it's not as though one side is truly dominating the other. If anything, I've been hearing a little bit that the defense has been performing awfully good. That doesn't mean that there's an outlandish number of turnovers or something. It means that, that quite simply that the offense is not having its way with the defense, which for those who want to see the defense improve, you're going to love hearing that. For those who want to say that the offense was just one of the top offenses in the country last year and now expects even more with Gabriel and more weapons, then what's the problem? Well, again, you can always find something to be aggrieved about, I suppose.
Yeah, and folks can really get into the weeds with that stuff too. Like, offense is always behind defense and development in preseason. That's any coach in the country would tell you that. And on top of that, I think that if I was looking at it like objectively as an Oregon fan, I would be more excited to see the defense not only competing but winning, or in some situations dominating. Like if that was the case, then I'd be happy, because being a tenacious and consistent and physical and all of the superlatives defense is going to be the difference between them beating a team like an Ohio State or Michigan versus, just being exciting with the football. It's what it always comes down to. But yeah, like preseason and camp and development, it always seems, and this is something that has been reiterated by coaches for years, that the offense is just going to be behind the defense regardless too.
And from what Lanning was saying about the first scrimmage, that basically that the offense ended up doing better on third down. That there was one turnover. Sounded like, reading between the lines, sounded like it was an interception. In that we were talking about quarterback decision making, and he alluded to one turnover. So sounds like it might have been in that way. Now it's unclear as to who threw that. That doesn't have to be anybody in particular. That could have been one of the walk-ons. Like, you have no idea. There's no reason to make an assumption as to who that might have been. But bottom line, And based off some in-house photos, it certainly looks like Jalen Lamar scored a rushing touchdown with what looked like at least part of the number one offense out there, based on, again, in-house photos from Oregon itself. So in terms of what could be gleaned and what was connected there, it sounded like there was not a ton by way of explosive plays. The defense may have had a turnover. Offense may have done better on third down. And like I say, at least this one rushing score because, Jalen Lamar is being hoisted up by multiple starting offensive linemen. So there you have it. But as to what that all may mean in the week ahead, we'll start to see in this week of practice, we'll start to be able to perhaps glean a little bit more by way of personnel groupings, a little bit more if certain groups start to get pared down a little bit, particularly among the returners, kickoff and punt returners, that is. Because even Joe Lorig, when we talked to him on Friday, basically said as much of, look, you cast kind of a wide net at first, and you want to see a bunch of guys get opportunities and a chance to field and a chance to showcase those skills in particular. And then, you got to make decisions and pare it down a bit because let's call it what it is. You're not going to have 8 or 9 guys return kickoffs during the season. I mean, that's simply not happening. You have about one on average over the year. I think it was 1.5 or 1.6 kickoff returns per game. So, and it's usually done by one player, maybe 2. So, you're not going to have 8 or 9 guys in the course of the season. Yeah, the running backs and a couple of receivers and a couple of DBs, they have to do something in the first period of practice. So, okay, you let some of the fastest guys go and field kickoffs for 4 or 5 minutes. Sure. But at a certain point, there's not going to be 8 or 9 of them. There just isn't. Now, historically, we've seen the running backs there before, even though hardly any of them actually returned kickoffs during the year until the postseason when Bucky Irving managed to get the opportunity to do that. And that's why I was asking Lorig about, is there anybody who's going to be off limits in some of those roles? Because, frankly, kickoffs is an area where this team needs to improve, on kickoff returns specifically. That's an area they need to get better. When you have this much speed on a team and this much depth in certain spots, you should be awfully nice if you could get back to having a dynamic kick returner. Sounds like there isn't necessarily going to be anybody, quote unquote, off limits. I'm sure, again, all within reason. Like, Tez Johnson's going to be back there on punt returns again. He did fine. One particularly longer return could have skewed that number much, much higher than it was anyway, so you can't really extrapolate too much off a really limited sample there. Nothing was bad last year on punt returns, so that was okay. Could it be better? Sure, but again, one return can really throw that number off. Kickoffs, I just think it's an area that they can absolutely be better, and they have more depth and they have more bodies. So we'll see exactly who may get a chance there. Could a Noah Whittington legitimately get a shot there? Possibly. Do I think one of the younger speed guys could Rod Pleasant actually get a shot there? I mean, you can't, if it's supposedly, if nobody's off limits and you're not going to rule it out, it'd be awfully hard to say no. And he probably is the fastest guy on the team, and at the moment he is vying to get his way onto the 2 deep at corner, but he may not be. So unless you're intent on redshirting him, I think he's at least worth a look. He's among that very large group of guys working with the kickoff return right now. He's not, the number one guy exactly, but we'll see. And I realize, we're talking about a play that ultimately happens, like I say, 1.5 times a game on average. So let's not make more of it than it is. But that's an area
so
that
infrequent,
we do see it.
Yeah,
and when they're dynamic at it, it can change the game, and that is one.
Yeah, you think back to DeAnthony Thomas against Kansas State in that Fiesta Bowl. Those are the memories that come up of the Oregon teams of old.
So they have the speed and they have the weapons on this team to make that a more dynamic play than it has been the last couple of years. We'll see ultimately who they turn to in that realm. Otherwise, frankly, some of the things that we got to look at heading into this week, not just in terms of what gets pared down and the like, is one group in particular is the edge rushers. Not just because they're younger, not just again that the whole off season long bit that we could talk about of they got a lot of production to replace in the front 7, and the D line got younger, but they brought in the 2 transfers, and it's a really sophomore and freshman laden edge group outside of Jordan Birch. absolutely. All those things were already true. What's changed ever so slightly over the last week is that Amarian Winston's been limited. Exactly to what extent in the course and throughout practice, we don't know, but we very clearly limited in terms of, even pre-practice, we're able to make that out very, very, very clearly. And Ashton Porter wasn't out there at the end of last week on either Wednesday or Friday, and one would discern that if you're not practicing multiple days during the week, you probably didn't take part in the scrimmage either. So when you knock off two guys off the edge, in particular two guys who are working at times at the same position, that becomes a thinner group. Do they still have bodies? Do they still have guys who are higher on the depth chart? Absolutely. Mateo and Tatum in particular. But bottom line, when you're putting off a scrimmage and you're trying to put two teams worth and go 2 and 3 deep on those two teams, when you knock two guys off, it becomes a thinner group in a hurry.
Thankfully they are built in such a way, like, where the depth you're talking about with guys like Mateo being present and being able to fill those gaps, at least in the confines of practice. We don't necessarily know, too, like you said, the extent of the injury for Winston. It's a right leg, I believe, if I remember correctly.
He's basically just had a sleeve, one of the many sleeves on, but it's clear that he's favoring the right leg. And again, you don't want to make more of it than it is. He's out there, he's practicing. It's just that he's with the guys who are limited, and he's not going through all the early practice reps that some of the other guys are. And that's as much as we know. Whereas Porter, he just hasn't been there the last couple of days. So we don't know exactly what the nature of that situation is either, but it's easy to, there's no point in even saying like what exactly it is. No, we don't know, but we know he's not there. So that's more significant than what Winston is dealing with, what appears to be a right leg issue. And we'll see, like I say, that is a group that we'll be paying attention to over the next week plus. And for that matter, same thing with the offensive line. Again, we have certainly a good feeling as to and a good idea as to who the starting five will be and where that'll go and all. Yeah, absolutely. And that could be rotating guys still and stuff. Yeah. But what I'm interested to see this week, heading into the beginning of next week, is all right. Like when do they shift to what was the personnel groups in spring, and even what we've seen early in camp of these split squad kind of deals? To it's going to come a point where the ones are going to be going with the ones, period. It's not going to be 3 starters with one group and 2 starters with the other group. And same thing on the defensive line. It's not going to be 2 starters with one group and 2 starters with the other group. And the linebacking core isn't going to have Boss on one side and Justin on the other. And I think you started to see that a little bit in the scrimmage. And I'm curious to see exactly at what point, perhaps this week, we start to see more of that across the board, that the ones are with the ones, the twos are with the twos, the threes are with the three, et cetera, and that they have to start to, make some personnel decisions because the season is rapidly approaching. And not that you have to be, not to look past number 7 in the FCS Idaho, but you do have to, sooner or later, fill out a depth chart, fill out a plan, and come up with some ideas for personnel. And I have no doubt that a very, very significant number of players will be taking part and participating in the season opener. I believe, going back to last year's game, and one of the notes I took there, I think it was right around 80. I want to say it was approximately 80 players took part in last year's game with Portland State. So read into that what you will in terms of who could all potentially be playing in the 4-game redshirt rule era combined with the expanded playoff era. I think you're going to see a very, very deep use of personnel on August 31st.
And that's fun, honestly. Like, beyond the team, like, destroying its opponent, and you see a lot of touchdowns and yada yada. I think that for, like, the hardcores, the sickos among Oregon fans, like, being able to see all of those guys that, really aren't going to see the field much, if at all, this year is fun, because you get little flashes of what could be in the coming years.
Hey, You don't have to. You don't have to say it's just among the sickos among the fan base. Believe me, go back a couple of years ago, and some of us who were tracking who the traveling second long snapper was, so that when the day came that Karsten Battles was no longer the starter, who it would be. And believe you me, we were taking note back in 21 that Luke Basso was indeed the next guy and the heir apparent. And lo and behold, wouldn't you know it?
There he is.
Yes, the starter all of last year and again this year. So, yes, there will be, I have no doubt, many of the scouting and the like for every position, including, special teams. We can joke a little bit, but no, with the amount of depth that they have at certain positions, particularly at the skilled positions, receiver and corner in particular, I think a lot of freshmen will get an opportunity, obviously, in that first game. But that said, the second game, like you mentioned, Ryan, goes and ratchets up significantly. It might be, frankly, the most competitive of the three non-conference games, and not just of the non-conference. I think the Boise State game could be – Boise might be a better team than multiple members of the Big Ten who Oregon is playing this year.
Yeah.
They are a legitimate team. Frankly, it would not shock me if Boise State – if the only loss they take is to Oregon. It would not shock me at all if Boise State goes 11-1 in the regular season and wins the Mountain West and is a 12-1 team. At all.
Seriously.
So they could I want to say easily, exactly. The Mountain West does have some decent teams in there, but they have every bit the level of talent and ability and the amount of guys returning, particularly on the defensive side, who were awfully productive off a team who made it, a mid-year coaching change and still won a conference title and all the rest, where they're a very, very live bullet, and not just in the playoff picture and the like, but they're you don't want to overlook them. They're significant. And I don't have to remind Oregon fans about not overlooking them. They've never beaten them. So I realize it's only 3 matchups, but you don't want to overlook this Boise team. You can overlook Purdue on a Friday night all you want. You may overlook Illinois all you want. You don't want to overlook Boise. That's not the team you want to be looking past because, you have Oregon State the following week and the rivalry. And even though that roster got battered and beaten up by the transfer portal, you don't overlook week 2.
You shouldn't. And I think that you're right. That could be something that could be a little more competitive than maybe Oregon fans are expecting for stretches of that game. And maybe they make the early season Ducks sweat a little bit, just given the level of talent that's on that side for the Broncos. And I think it's the start of a nice little stretch for Oregon to kind of work the kinks out and really play against quote unquote competitive football teams. Now, the Beaver game is an interesting one for the fact that it will more likely be competitive due to the rivalry maybe than the talent on the field, but that's a different conversation entirely with that game. But that game, the Boise State game, and that game on the road at UCLA, preceding, of course, a game at home against a Michigan State team that you feel better about than maybe most of your Big Ten opponents. But those 3 games in particular, I think, are nice little tune-ups and work it out type games for a team that has really high expectations. Obviously, the expectation for them is to win those games and win them big, but within the confines, within the little moments of those games, especially if Boise State is making you sweat a little bit in the first or second quarter of that game, that's good. That's all valuable, because you don't want to just come strolling into that Ohio State game and have sort of quote unquote saved your energy up for that. You want some highly competitive moments, and football is football, but not every non-conference schedule and not every stretch of games leading into such a major matchup like the Ohio State one is going to lend itself to that level of preparation.
Yeah, and that's where, because of the scheduling changes and the things that were done, I know on paper it looks like, it's, I would say disappointing is the wrong word, but it looks like, Oregon's not playing a power conference team in non-conference play this year. And they're not. And don't begin to tell me that the Pac-12 is still power. I mean, just stop it. Just stop it. It's not. But Boise is every bit, not just as good as, they are flat out better than probably somewhere in the realm of more than 20 of the Power 4 conference teams, at least, maybe more, frankly. So, yeah, they may not be one of the Power 4 leagues, but truly, Boise State is legitimately better than probably in the realm of 20, if not more, Power 4 conference teams. They just are. So I understand that, by league affiliation, there's not that Power 4 conference opponent because of all the moves and things that had to be done and moving Texas Tech a million years into the future in order to wedge the Oregon State game back in and move it up on the calendar, all those things. Yes, I get it. I get it. But for that matter, Ohio State doesn't have a Power Conference non-conference game either. So their early schedule isn't exactly loaded either. So that's why on paper these two teams look like they're going to be heading into a matchup each at 5-0 because, frankly, Oregon has the two toughest games on paper. I mean, you could argue about whether Ohio State hosting Iowa, who's ranked, is a tougher matchup or not than Oregon hosting Boise, who's just outside the top 25. We can quibble about differences there, but ultimately, yeah, I mean, those are the two toughest games, followed by Oregon going to UCLA, that either of those teams are playing before playing each other. Not
great Iowa quarterback play rumblings based on what we've heard, but I mean, what do you expect there? So
yeah, I mean, it can't get worse. It can't get worse.
It can't possibly be worse.
But bottom line, again, we'll certainly get into the week to week and all that stuff in the weeks ahead, and we'll obviously do that all throughout the season. But insofar as getting into, like I say, this first basically week and a half of camp, from what we saw last week on the field and these preseason rankings, think we've certainly got a pretty good handle on things at the moment. And obviously much still to be gleaned and learned and to look ahead to. And as we wrap up this edition of the podcast with that, what are you hoping to discern? What are you hoping to hear about over the next week or so, Ryan? I say week or so because, yes, we'll probably pop in early again next week with another edition of the podcast, maybe before camp, quote unquote, officially wraps up. But whether it be over the next week or 10 days until basically the end of the camp period of time, and then they shift gears to game preparation for the opener, what are you looking to glean? What are you hoping to hear? Perhaps see a little bit from practices, whatever the case may be. What is it that you've got left by way of questions and things that you're trying to discern here over the next week to 10 days before, like I say, before things really shift into to game preparation mode for the Ducks?
Yeah, I think a lot of people have a lot of the same questions, right? Who's going to start where who's going to be at certain positions, who's healthy, all those sorts of things that swirl around a preseason camp. I have been interested in my trips down to Eugene, fascinated by some of the individual personalities on the team and the, I think, general connectedness that you see from this group. And you've obviously been around, multiple years of Oregon football teams, some connected more than others. It's a product of finding the right personalities. Some guys don't fit the mold. It is what it is. But I think that, you look around, you listen to the guys talk to each other, you get a general feel for what these practices are like. And there is a sense of genuine connectedness already from the group. I think that's a foundation that was set in the spring, and all the different team building activities that whether the coaches were the ones that started it or the players did it on their own. For example, like what has been talked about ad nauseum with Dylan Gabriel piling all the wide receivers into his van. There is a sense of that, despite, the expectation setting and the football jargon and the outside noise and the sometimes, not terribly intuitive or, informational conversations that you might have with coaches because they're trying to keep things close to the vest. You do get a sense that this is a group that isn't just talented on the field, but, has a level of connectedness that if they maintain it, if they are able to keep the focus through the season and execute on the field, that it could be something special. I'm excited to just talk to people and just to get to know the individual personalities on the team as the season goes along. There'll be plenty of room for you and me and everybody else that covers this team, for the Oregonian to get into the analysis and the conjecture and week to week go through our power rankings and answer mailbag questions and everything else. But those personalities are what are standing out to me and what I hope to continue to dive into in the coming weeks.
And with that, like I say, we'll certainly be talking to more players and coaches in the week and a half plus ahead as they wrap up camp. And then obviously shift gears to the start of the 2024 season, which, yes, believe it or not, less than 3 weeks away, rapidly approaching on the 31st with Idaho. And then, yes, Boise State setting up in week 2, Oregon State the week after. And then the first of 2 byes. A reminder to everybody that in case for some reason you haven't looked at the schedule or seen that and reminded yourself, it is a 2-bye season across the sport. And Oregon got the short end of the stick from the Big Ten in terms of a bye followed by 8 consecutive games. The only team in the league to get that. That's why I say they drew the short end of the stick, because no other team in the league has that. And their second bye is the week before Washington. For that matter, Washington's second bye is also that week, but their first bye week is at a different time, be that as it may. So much to get into, obviously, like I say, on a week-to-week basis, but we will certainly chat with you again next week, go over more of what we got by way of this week at camp and hear from some more members of the coaching staff, some more players, and where things look as the Ducks begin to prepare and shift their gears towards actual season preparation and the like. But with that, I am James Crepea. Here's Ryan Clarke, and we will see you next week here on the Ducks Confidential podcast. Reminder, make sure to like, subscribe, 5-star review, all those things, so that way more people can find us, listen to us, and the like, and it will pop into your feed accordingly. And we will see you next week.